This episode of the Farmers Weekly podcast is brought to you in partnership with KWS.
I've actually spoken to AHDB about these figures and they've tried to explain a bit about it. They use a selection of farmers, not all of them have finished harvest, they haven't got all the regionality in, so they're not fully reflective for a start. But there's no way that we're just 1% under. I'm regularly hearing that farmers are 40% under where they normally are.
Just why doesn't the latest harvest report reflect the poor yields experienced by growers? We find out. Industry leaders give a mixed reaction to the latest inheritance tax proposals. And one of Britain's biggest livestock auctioneers voices concern at differences in electronic identification systems for cattle in England and Scotland. Welcome to the Farmers Weekly podcast. I'm Johann.
And I'm Hugh Broom.
A bumper week this week with no Louise, it's just Hugh and me, and we go straight to our top story. A data error means the latest harvest progress report by the Agriculture and Horticulture Development Board has overestimated cereal yields. The report says harvest yields this summer are about 1% down on the 5-year average. Not so, say frustrated growers who believe many yields are down by 1/3 or more. So why the discrepancy and why weren't the numbers right in the first place? We speak to the AHDB in a moment, but first, NFU Combinable Crops Chairman Jamie Burrows.
I've actually spoken to AHDB about these figures and they've tried to explain a bit about it. They use a selection of farmers, not all of them have finished harvest, they haven't got all the regionality in, so they're not fully reflective for a start. But there's no way that we're just 1% under. I'm regularly hearing that farmers are 40% under where they normally are. And this year, I was talking to farmers yesterday. One of them's just about old enough to remember 76, and he said, this is worse. A, because the last 2 harvests before this have been pretty rubbish. And B, we were more self-sufficient back then, so the price went up. Price hasn't gone anywhere except down from this time last year. And it's really compounding it. So if you put those two things together, you've got the AHDB's figures. If you're a bank manager and a farmer's coming to you and saying, I'm really struggling here, well, your bank manager's going to say, well, I've looked at the AHDB figures and they're saying it's not that bad. So what, are you a bad farmer? Do I want to be backing you? It's not just a market outlook. People use these figures. And the one thing I beg of AHDB is the next time they release something like that, put a really quick paragraph underneath it. Explain about the word support when it comes to market figures. You've got some farmers thinking, well, that's all right, we're about to get intervention back at £170 a tonne. It's not going to happen, unfortunately. But it just needs to be a bit more explanation to make these figures make more sense.
So are you saying then, Jamie, that these figures are inaccurate, or are you saying that it's the way that they're presented? Because there does seem to be a big swathe of growers from the Wash down to the Severn who have had a really bad harvest this year.
I think it is very regional. I think it is down to soil type, and of course it's down to rain. I'm going to mix millimetres and inches here, but our spring barley in Norfolk saw about 12 mil of rain the whole time it was in the ground, and as soon as it became ripe, it had 2 inches of rain on it. It's so variable, even locally. I was talking to a guy in Wales yesterday. He's had one of the best harvests ever, if not the best harvest ever, because he's had regular rainfall. Parts of Cornwall have had the same, but the majority just aren't anywhere near average. So in terms of the figures, I'm sure in the cross-section of farmers that AHDB have looked at, they must be about right. It's not giving a full representation of the whole of the UK, in my opinion.
That's NFU Combinable Crops Chairman Jamie Burrows. Now, since we spoke to Jamie, the AHDB has admitted that its progress report was indeed inaccurate. It says that the data on which its analysis was based had faults in it, and it is working to find out how that happened, and it will reissue an accurate harvest progress report in due course. Here's Sarah Wolford, Cereals and Oilseed Sector Director at the AHDB.
So what exactly has happened is we've obviously released the harvest progress report, and at that stage it was just under 50% complete, the harvest progress. from that, we have obviously received some criticism around that report and is it factual. AHDB have taken that feedback very seriously and have investigated that with the Anderson Centre. Upon that investigation, the Anderson Centre have come back and said they have found an error in their yield data and they are investigating that. On response from that, AHDB have taken immediate action and will be investigating. But more importantly, because we are the trusted organisation and we want to continue to be the trusted organisation and be transparent with our levy payers, we felt it extremely important that we release this news to the sector today, and that is happening this afternoon.
So what are you doing to ensure that this doesn't happen again?
So we really do apologise for the incorrect data that has been released. Our priority is to investigate and rectify this and to ensure that our data and insights that are delivered to the sector are reliable and trusted source.
Now, some people are saying that we should wait until harvest is over, until everything's safely gathered in, and then have one single final report. But from your point of view, it's important for the whole of the industry to have these progress reports as harvest continues.
Yes, it is. And the reason why the progress report is so important, the harvest progress report, it's due to the fact that, the UK market is predominantly domestic market. I mean, a proportion does get exported of the grain. So the supply chain here is heavily reliant on domestic grain. So it is important for the levy payers, and that includes the growers plus the whole supply chain, to understand what quality is coming off. It supports growers in making their marketing decisions. It supports the remainder of the supply chain in regards to the quality that's coming off and the impact that will have on their processing, and also their decision in their accumulation. So it's all interconnected, and this harvest progress report supports those decisions along the supply chain.
Sarah Wolford there from the AHDB. Hugh, the AHDB apologising there, the data on which they based their analysis proving to be incorrect. They're working to find out what went wrong, and they'll issue a correct progress report as soon as they can.
Well, at least they've come out and said that it was a bit of a cock-up. And you can understand the frustration with lots of farmers because, it's just such a horrific year this year for so many farms, whether you're talking about wheat yield, whether you're talking about forage yield, lots of different levels. And then so to have this come out and say, oh, what are you worrying about? There's only a 1% drop. And it's a big difference between a 1% and 3% drop, isn't it? But just to say there's a 1% drop and then say, well, actually, we got the numbers wrong. Not a good look. I don't know. What do you do, Johann? How do you have to put better processes into HDB? Then they can spend more money on processing things and not actually benefiting growers. I don't know. They just need to wake up, really, don't they, and get their proverbial together.
Well, I think from their point of view, Hugh, it wasn't their analysis that was wrong. It was the data upon which they based their analysis that was incorrect.
But ultimately, they're responsible for it. So did they not think, hang on a minute, a 1% drop when everyone's been telling me how utterly rubbish most of the harvest has been? Is that right? Should we go back and double check it?
Well, that's exactly what they say they have done. They've revisited the data. They have found an anomaly. They are working to correct it, working to find out how that happened, ensuring that it won't happen again. And they will release a revised report in due course.
Well, that's good that they've done that, and then hopefully they'll realise the mistakes that have been made. So hopefully it won't happen again. But in a normal year, people aren't neither nonplussed by it, are they? But as has been pointed out, in a year like this, where it's really touch and go for so many arable enterprises with all that's going on, then to have that come out. And then the sentiment that wrong data creates within parts of the industry, it's just not useful. It needs to be right from the start.
The Farmers Weekly Podcast.
And now a special word with this week's podcast partner, Olivia Bacon from plant breeder KWS. Olivia, you're here to talk about your new Group 1 bread making wheat, KWS Vibe. Tell me about it.
Yes, so Vibe, we're very pleased with. It's a new Group 1, so it's been officially approved as a Group 1 wheat now. And the two obvious reasons for that are protein and yield. So in a trial that we did with NIAB down in Hampshire, we had lots of different rates of nitrogen, and compared to KWS Vibe, when we applied 320 kilos of nitrogen, which was the most that we applied, Vibe contained 1% more protein than Zayat, showing just how well that it responds to nitrogen applications, which is really exciting going forward.
Good nitrogen efficiency, good yields. You're saying it's the full package, yeah?
Yeah, we are. It's also got really good untreated yield as well, along with a Hagberg of 283, specific weight of 79.1. It's nice to have a variety in that Group 1 section, especially with good untreated yield now.
Impressive stats for growers. What are the millers telling you?
Yeah, it slots perfectly with what they're doing. It's clean, it's got short, stiff straw, and the feedback we're getting from them is that it's really good as well. It's very consistent, which is really important when looking at Group 1 production and the rising demand.
So good in the field and in the flour mill as well then?
So the millers really like it. The feedback we've received from UK flour millers is really good. Baking trials have shown that Vibe beats market leaders like Zaya in, low volume, crumb quality and pastry layering. And it's got that consistency as well that flour millers need. It's a really good protein banker for UK wheat.
Olivia Bacon from KWS, this week's podcast partner. Thank you very much.
The Farmers Weekly Podcast.
Now, government plans to impose inheritance tax on farmers could be better targeted. So says a new report by independent economists from the think tank Centax. The report recommends changing the threshold so fewer family farms are impacted by the inheritance tax plan, but it rejects an alternative clawback mechanism suggested by the NFU and other industry groups. Industry leaders have given a mixed response to the report, but could it be the off-ramp the government needs to change its plan and appease family farms? I spoke to Centax report co-author and associate professor Andy Summers from the London School of Economics.
Well, I think the point of this report was to put some more evidence out there in the public domain. This is obviously something that's been driven such a lot of public interest, not just amongst farmers, but the wider public. And we thought that it was a useful service to that debate to try to get a bit more evidence out there. And so, these are options that we're modelling. We do say that each of them have some advantages and drawbacks, and we're kind of leaving it to others to decide whether that's something that they want to endorse. But we think at least that's opening new space for debate in an area where probably, as of recently, it sort of looked like there wasn't any more scope for thinking about possible changes.
And Andy, you did consult with farmers, didn't you, when you were compiling this research? Because it has had a mixed response. I mean, the NFU saying that your recommendations show that the whole inheritance tax issue deserves another look. But the Country Land and Business Association, they're saying that you've only used a tiny amount of data to justify your view and that you've failed to speak to a single farmer or family business owner. But I thought that you did consult with farmers.
We did, yeah. We thought it was really important to engage with farm groups the whole way along, because definitely we would recognise that a lot of points have been made since the budget that not obvious to those who aren't themselves involved in farming, and that it is really important. Obviously, we're trying to base our analysis on the data that we have access to, and there's advantages to that because that data is much more representative than other sources of information that are out there. But you do need to understand where the data is lacking and what sorts of additional things you need to account for. And so throughout this whole process, we have engaged closely with the NFU and lots of other farm groups. Actually, I would say also the CLA, despite the comments that they made earlier about not engaging with farmers. They were at every single one of the meetings that we had through the course of this research. So I was a bit surprised to see that quote from them. But we think it is really important to do that. Because there are things in the analysis that would not have been in there if we hadn't had that engagement. And so we're really grateful for that.
The fact remains, though, that some farms will find it really difficult to pay any inheritance tax simply because the return on capital invested in their businesses is so low. I mean, we're talking about a return on capital of 0.5%. That makes it really hard to pay any inheritance tax.
We looked at this question because it is the important one that's really come out of discussions around this reform about whether farms would need to be sold to pay the tax. So the first thing we've got to emphasise is what we were looking at in the data is what we define as a farm estate, and that is different to a single farm because it might be that one farm is sort of split, the ownership split across multiple people, so that would show up in multiple estates. It could be that one estate owns multiple farms, so you can't just read across from farm estates to farms. But what we found when we looked at farm estates was that a bit over 8 out of 10 of those farm estates that would have to pay extra tax as a result of the planned reform would actually be able to pay that tax entirely out of non-farm assets. So that's not the farmland, not the farmhouse, and not the other farm assets. But it's important to stress, and we did try to be careful about this in the report, that figure of 8 out of 10, that's out of all farm estates, including other landowners and people with small holdings in farms, and that's why they can then pay out of those non-farm assets. So we're not saying 8 out of 10 farms can pay out of non-farm assets. In fact, what we say on that is there are 70 farm estates per year that would be unable to pay out of non-farm assets, and it's reasonable to think that most of those would be family farms.
And those family farms, 70 farms is still 70 farms. They are going to be devastated if this inheritance tax proposal is pushed through.
Absolutely, and I think we don't want to say that, we don't say in the report that 70 is a small number. It's for others to judge, what kind of level of impact would be acceptable to the government. That is though the motivation for these alternative options that could raise that combined allowance to reduce that number, because we do find that, for example, under the minimum share rule, instead of 70, it would be less than half that amount under this alternative option.
You've also, as it were, Andy, tried to ease the pain for older farmers in terms of transferable allowances between spouses. Explain that to me.
That is something that's been highlighted in the debate already, but we think there are several reasons why it should be possible that if somebody in a couple, that if they haven't used the full allowance on the first death, that would automatically go to the surviving spouse. What we say is, in the long run, we actually don't think that would cost very much additional revenue, because the alternative is that lots of couples will have to do tax planning to sort of work around that, which is not very satisfactory from anyone's perspective. In the short run, though, it is true that if you backdated that, so if you gave that transferable allowance to those surviving spouses whose partner had already died, then in those instances there would be an upfront cost to the government. Now we still think there's a strong case for doing that, and that's the argument around the impact on older farmers in particular and the transitional issues. So we set that out as well in the report as something that the government could do.
So what you're saying then is that you approached this with an open mind and came up with some straightforward, unbiased recommendations that you think could work.
We really did not know what we were going to find when we started on this. We felt strongly that there should be more evidence in the public domain to inform this debate. And we're fortunate at Sentax that we're able to use HMRC data, the same data that government uses. And we sort of felt that we had a responsibility based on that to try to help provide a new analysis that would inform this debate. When we started, we really didn't know where we were going to end up. And I think as it's turned out, this report, it will have some things in that make for uncomfortable reading for farm bodies, but there I think are also things in there that do support some of the concerns that have been raised and do try to provide constructive suggestions for how this reform could be improved from where it is in a way that would work better for farmers while still achieving the government's own objectives. And so, we hope that those options are considered seriously.
Andy Summers from Centax, thank you for talking to us here on the Farmers Weekly podcast. Hugh, a mixed response from the industry to that Centax report on inheritance tax. Some good, some bad, but could it be the off-ramp that the government and the industry need to reach agreement on a way forward on the inheritance tax proposals?
The optimist in you says, yeah, it could be the foundations of the building of an off-ramp. It's still glaringly obvious that this particular policy piece from the current government was missing. They've sort of railroaded through with the risk assessments. Some would say they haven't done the risk assessments, but the key thing it was missing all the way through and is still missing is a full open consultation. Now, despite them not having a consultation, obviously loads of material has been thrown at them in the last 10 months since they unveiled it last October. But yeah, you could argue, the optimist in you says, look, this is the start of an off-ramp. Things like, should the threshold go from 1 million up to 5 million would take a whole load of smaller family farms out of it. I've sort of read the report. I haven't read it at a slow pace. I've sort of skim read it and gone through it. And I'm still quite confused, and I need to read it in great detail to see the breakdown between APR and BPR. Because the worry is that they say, there's only 70 estates that are affected by this, And the reality is it will be a lower number of estates than we think, because there's not that many farmers in the country and not many die every year as a proportion of the population. So that's why those figures sound lower. But it's still making sure that the differential between APR claims and BPR claims, because that's really important, as has been previously pointed out. So it's easy to say, there's 70 APR claims, but then they completely ignore the BPR. The gentleman, Andy, he pointed out, to be fair to him, and he says because he wrote the report, in the text, it says, when they talked about the farms that they looked at, some of those were small holdings, they were small concerns. So any tax liability, because the acreage and the value is smaller, is going to be significantly smaller than something that's 2 or 3 or 5 or 1,000 acres. But look, it could be the start of an off-ramp.
I guess the other question is, it could be the start of an off-ramp, but will the government take the off-ramp, or will it just dig in its heels?
Well, yeah, who knows? Look, what's happening with government at the moment, who knows? I mean, at the moment, it seems to be, there was still lots of talk around reshuffles before or after the conference season, which obviously will be on us by the end of September. Will there be a reshuffle before the next budget? I mean, at one stage, the Chancellor's position didn't look great when there was all the drama on the front bench and everything a few months ago. Didn't look particularly credible. There will be people, still saying to the Prime Minister, this still isn't a great look. When you look at business, when you look at all that's going on, yes, we got the growth figures from the other day showed a slight, we're doing 0.3 or 0.4%, which is better than everyone thought. And actually, it's pretty good compared to the rest of the G7, but overall, it's still pretty rubbish. But in terms of appetite for investment, everybody I speak to and everyone listening to this podcast that speaks to people about what's going on in business, whether you're I was sat in a dealership the other day buying a secondhand truck, talking to the gentleman on the desk next to the chap I was dealing with, and he was selling the diggers at that dealership, and he said it's just all over the blooming place at the moment.
Well, exactly. And if we look at the wider economy, Hugh, we've had figures this week saying that growth in the economy as a whole lower than expected. We've also, looking at farming itself, UK agricultural tractor registrations in July 2025. If we look at that as a barometer of the state of the industry and the confidence within farming, registrations of agricultural tractors below par again in July, 7% fewer than in the same month last year, and around 20% below the average for the time of year. So what the Agricultural Engineers Association is saying is that farmers lacking the confidence to invest due to uncertainty around agricultural policy, national, global economic conditions, coupled with a difficult financial situation for arable farmers. So it does appear that this uncertainty, this ongoing concern within the sector, is having a very, very real effect on farm in terms of investment. I mean, what could the Chancellor say? I mean, it might be a different Chancellor come October, but what could they say?
What could they say? Well, the great thing would be, oh, look, we got this a bit wrong. Or I get where they're coming from. I totally get where they're coming from in terms of the sort of parking money in land situation. And as we've said before, it's partly responsible for the reason why farmland is now worth a lot more than it was proportionally 20 years ago or 40 years ago, aside inflation. But then that's added to farmers' benefit because it's meant their balance sheet's been higher, so they've been able to borrow more and invest more and move forward. The downside is if you're buying land, it makes it more expensive. We just need to find that halfway house, don't we? Either we raise the threshold from the 1 million to 5 million, so it takes out a lot of smaller farms which are turning over cash and not making a vast amount of money. We also need to get this. It's back to the idea of this farmer test. Those that take, and it's actually the whole BPR thing, isn't it? Those people which take a risk, whether they are farming, undertaking, hoteliering, restauranting, plumbing, whatevering, okay? If they are a family entity, they are taking a risk, then they should be entitled to some relief so that the capital value, the taxation on the capital values that they built up doesn't utterly decimate it, as in line with lots of other G7 and other Western economies. Okay, they all do it. If they're just parking cash in land, then yes, you need to penalise those people. If they're lazy landlords that just want to dump 20 million quid that they very wisely won on a hedge fund or whatever, and they just want to park it there and walk away, taking no risk, not investing anything in the tenants, not investing anything in the estate. If they're lazy landlords, should they be entitled? ? So it's about rewarding risk, encouraging investment, and encouraging business to go forward at whatever level. And I still think we need to make more of the wider context, the impact this has on business, not just the direct impact of BPR going, but the other wider impact it has on all the other businesses linked to those businesses that are going to be affected by the BPR going. So it's about encouraging investment in getting people moving and getting people working. And at the moment, the policy, all of the policy everywhere, whether it's this policy, whether it's employment policy, whether it's trade policy, it's all computer says no. It's like, well, what the hell are you going to pay everything with?
The Farmers Weekly Podcast.
At Avant, we crafted compact loaders for arable farming that transform the way you work. Our machines offer unparalleled versatility and efficiency, serving as your partners in productivity. With a wide range of attachments, Avant loaders assist in field preparation, crop care, and harvest activities. Their powerful hydraulics and compact design ensure smooth operation in tight spaces. Join the thousands of farmers who trust Avant for their best yields. Avant, innovation that works as hard as you do. Search for Avant now.
You're up before sunrise during the busiest time of year and still on your feet 12 hours later. The V12 Cotswold dealer boot is made for days like this, built for comfort, safety and strength to handle whatever the day throws at you. They've been independently tested by Sartre against the market-leading boot, proving they're not only the toughest, but outperforming the competition in long-lasting durability as well. No gimmicks, just boots that do their job, so you can do yours. Now that's fair dinkum. Use the code podcast20 for 20% off your first order. Visit v12footwear.com to place your order now. The V12 Cotswold gets tougher with age.
The Farmers Weekly Podcast.
You're listening to the Farmers Weekly Podcast. Welcome along wherever you're listening to us from. You can email us podcast@fwi.co.uk. And if you're in the UK itself, you can also message us by texting the word farm followed by your message to 88440. Hugh, a lot of talk about drought this week. No rain, dry soils, forage difficult to come by. People already feeding winter stocks.
Well, they've been doing that for months, Johann. Some really big. It's really coming out to the fore now. The concerns, and again, it's in places where you would never think it would be a problem. Reports out of Wales, parts of South Wales now officially in drought. I see there was an ITV News piece with Abby Reader, and she was highlighting the complete lack of any forage she's got going into this winter. And there's lots of other farms like her in the west, down into England, still up in the northeast. It's really dry. Everywhere, it's a real concern. I mean, the only places that have got plenty of forage seem to be the northwest and then up into Scotland. But certainly everywhere else, it is really, really variable. Some people are okay, don't get me wrong, but there are many that aren't, and the many that are already well into their winter stocks, and they have been eating into their winter stocks for the last couple of months.
And Hugh, you've been down to Devon this week, and you'd think that, the southwest, the West Country would be the land of milk and honey when it comes to good forage growing weather.
Yeah, well, it would be. I mean, I think further down into Cornwall, they're probably not as bad, but certainly I was in East Devon for the last week, and it's seriously dry there. And talking to some of the farmers around there, forage stocks are really low. I had the pleasure and the honour of going to the Honiton show last week, which is a fantastic show. Saw quite a few people there I knew, weirdly, even though I was a complete random and I was on holiday. But what a great show. But it is so dry, and that's all they were talking about, just lack of forage. And worries about straw as well.
Bit of a busman's holiday then, Hugh, going away and still managing to take in an agricultural show. I get it, though. It is one of the good ones.
Well, we don't have any. Well, we've got some agricultural shows in the southeast, but very few compared to places like Devon. And when you go up into the north, where there's still a plethora of wonderful, wonderful shows, both small and large. Another thing that caught my eye this weekend, Farmers Weekly. It's on the socials. I'm not sure it's in the magazine or not, but Kerry Pratt sent in a picture of her uncle from Norfolk, and this year they are celebrating 50 years of Gordon Pratt driving combines on their family farm in Norfolk. 50 years. So I don't know, it's a picture of him on a lovely big Lexion combine. I'm assuming he probably started on a Class Matador or a Clayson 1540 or something equally as high-tech back in 1975.
Also in the eastern counties, NFU Sugar and British Sugar have concluded negotiations and agreed a deal for the 2026-27 sugar beet contracts. These include, Hugh, a one-year fixed price contract at £30 a tonne for up to 65% of the contract, and a one-year contract with a guaranteed base price of £25 per tonne plus a market-linked bonus for up to 100% of the contract. I guess the good news here, if there is any, is that, at £30 a tonne, at least that one-year fixed price contract begins with a 3 rather than a 2.
Well, yeah, lucky the wonderful world of sugar, where you're there's pros and cons to it, but one of the pros, I suppose, is you know what price you're going to get for the product before you sort of put it in the ground. So yeah, good luck to them. At least, like you say, at least they've got a 3 there and not a 2.
And that price being agreed, sooner rather than later, as it has been in many of the recent years. The other thing we're waiting for, Hugh, is news on the Vivergo bioethanol plant. Is the government going to blink first when it comes to, not bailing it out, but ensuring that there's still a market for UK wheat growers selling into that plant following the trade deal with the US?
Yeah, look, it's really important, that plant. We know that it probably puts, I don't know, anything from 5, even some would say even puts up 10, 15 quid a tonne into the wheat market, sort of north of the Midlands. It's a hugely important plant. It's a massive plant as well. It's a huge piece of investment, given what it can do and what it can process. There were other products coming on stream to be processed next door to it, namely some of the one company wanting to do a greener version of avgas for putting into jet planes. And this idea that it's just going to get taken apart and packed up in a box and scrapped is just horrific, really. And it's back to what NFU have been saying, lots of people have been saying. If government, the fact that they've allowed this chunk of ethanol to come in from the US tariff-free strikes everyone as a bit of a last-minute blink in the trade negotiations, and someone let it slip through the net when perhaps they shouldn't have done. But they could rectify it by going from whatever is the 10 or 15% ethanol inclusion in fuel, is ramp it up to wherever you need to do it to keep that plant running, because actually it makes logical sense to produce it here as opposed to bringing it in from abroad. In France, it's up to 80% of the petrol there is ethanol based, so that you can do it, that things will still run on it, but it needs government to lead on this and actually encourage. And just because it's linked to farming and evil farmers in the countryside, not leave it to rot in the corner. This is a big employer in that area. It's a huge piece of technology. It's a huge piece of infrastructure. Show the world you're open for business, and let's get on and get it working.
And like you say, it does put a floor in the market, a market price, a floor price in that wheat market. Hugh, the other markets, what's going on?
Well, let's start with the Finnish steer average this week. At the moment, it is 6.43 dead. So it's gone up about 0.6 of a penny. Some worry in the beef market this week around the 78% tariff that's been put on Brazilian beef imports into the US. And there's a lot of worry around Europe. There's about 170,000 tons of beef sat in Brazil with no home. Some of it could come here, and it might erode that beef price. We'll have to see what happens. Finnish steer live weight 365.9. That is nudged up around about a penny. Onto the sheep rings. SQQ dead weight on the sheep 754.7. That has dropped back about a penny on the week. The live weight is 344.9. That has gone back about 3p on the week. The pig price 208.1. That's gone up about 0.2 of a p. And then if we look at the arable markets, again, not much cheer there, I'm afraid. Feed wheat this week spots in at 161.30, so that's dropped back about a penny on the week. The milling wheat price is 184 dead. That's gone back about 150 on the week. The barley price almost stays the same. It's actually edged back 10p, so it's £143.30. Oilseed rape, that has dropped back as well, I'm afraid, £384.20, back from £397 last week. Onto feed peas, £210.50. That's actually gone up about £9. Feed beans go back £1 at 210.90. And if you are filling tractors with diesel, that's better news. It's back about a penny, 67.1 pence per litre as of Wednesday morning's red diesel ring round.
The Farmers Weekly Podcast.
Want to get the most out of your on-farm AD plant? Unlock its full potential with Amor. Amor run their own AD so they know what works and how to help you. Their lab offers fast, insightful testing alongside valuable advice to keep your digester stable and productive. From biological management to rapid feedstock analysis, Amor has got you covered. For more details, email amor@abagri.com. That's AMUR at abagri.com. Let's get your AD running at its best.
The Farmers Weekly Podcast.
And finally, Scotland and England are divided over which electronic identification systems to adopt for cattle. The Westminster government has chosen low frequency or LF technology for newborn calves in England from 2027. But the Scottish government is choosing an ultra high frequency or UHF system for cattle in Scotland. The split decision is set to add immense cost and bureaucracy to the cross-border livestock trade, so says Scott Donaldson of Auctioneers Harrison and Hetherington, which has marts in both England and Scotland.
We're probably quite peculiar in that about 40% of the cattle that we sell has effected a cross-border movement to get here. So, we've Scottish cattle going to England, English cattle going to Scotland. Some Scottish cattle coming to sell here and go back to Scotland. So, but that doesn't matter. There's just 40% of the cattle is there's 24,000 cattle a year that we are selling have had a cross-border movement. So we need to have two systems running to cope with the cross-border movements, and it's going to cost us a lot of money. It's a lot of grief. And really, I'm just starting to get to the bottom of what the solution is, because there's no point crying about it. We are where we are.
And presumably the obvious thing, though, is for the Scottish government to follow the the English government, and just have low-frequency tags, and all the tags are the same.
Yeah, and I've heard both arguments for quite a long time, really. The Scottish are absolutely adamant that UHF is the future. This is the frequency of the future. It's the technology for the future. It holds more information. They have a long list of pros against low frequency that they will convince us that that's what we should have, but they haven't got the accreditation for it yet, so they're really not in a position to start implementing it just yet, and they haven't given us a date. Somebody said to me, it was on the Highland show, they said if you think about high frequency UHF being the Amazon of cattle EID, then low frequency is the Littlewoods catalogue. So which would you rather have?
When you look at the situation you're in now, when you look at the costings, what's it going to cost you to run both systems?
I'm trying to get to the bottom of what it's going to cost us to put cattle meters in, because a lot of the trials have been done in the south of England, and I'm having this discussion with some of the people in our industry. Why have they not trialled it in one of the busiest markets in the UK? It's the volume is talking. We could have 2,000 cattle in here on a Wednesday. I am not about to send my staff around with a stick reader to read them all. It could cost us, I'm guessing, if we could have put both systems in excess of 100,000, it could be near 200,000 by the time we put panel readers in to cover the amount of rings that we need sorted. And we haven't even decided exactly where in the market we want the cattle read. It might be more than one place. The way we work at the minute is that every animal comes through a race, and we put a ticket on it, and the ticket corresponds to the paperwork to the tag number. So we can identify that animal at any point because it has a ticket on its back. With the implementation of EID, could we do without that ticket? Can we reduce our staff numbers? Can we reduce the cattle handling aspect of the system to make it better for the people and better for the cattle?
In terms of timescale, what's the timescale that the Scottish system have given you?
Well, they haven't given us a timescale, to be honest. The only thing I know is that January 2027 we're going to start tagging calves with the low frequency EID tags in England. Scotland actually haven't given us a date. We're assuming it's the same time, but that's not been confirmed as far as I'm aware.
Scott Donaldson from Harrison and Hetherington talking to Hugh. Hugh, it's clear that these two systems are going to have to talk to each other in a language that they can both understand. It's not the sort of thing that you can use Google Translate for. What's the solution going to be?
No, well, I mean, in theory, the data set is different, isn't it? I mean, the data set is compatible because you can interface between the data sets. It's the technology in the cow's ear that's causing some confusion, and it's still a bit of a. I'm still confused. The only reason I can think they seem to be really keen on UHF because there's some of a lot of the equipment, like the readers and the scanners and all that stuff, are really cheap because it's the same tech that's, as we said before, is used in your credit card, in Amazon warehouses, in fulfillment centers, all that sort of stuff to track boxes. So it's cheap as chips. However, it's back to this whole thing, the idea. So you've got people in industry going, oh, that's brilliant. You can get a stick reader for 50 quid as opposed to 600 quid or 700 quid, which an LF one, a low frequency one, is that sort of money. But then when you dig down and you ask these people, and I've been in meetings with people, and I say, well, when did you last EID your cat or use EID? And none of them have. And then it comes down to the fact, oh, yeah, but you can get this ray gun and you can turn, and it will do it with UHF tags. You can point a ray gun at a load of cows, and if you know there's 5 cows in the pen, you turn up the strength and it zaps all 5 chips. And it says, there's the 5 cows. But in a shed of 400 cows or in a market of 1,000 cows, are you going to trust it that it's done that? You're still going to have to run everything through the race individually. So it's back to this whole thing. I can't understand why then just stick with the tech that we've got, which is the LF. It's a bit like devolution gone mad. I don't know whether the SMP thought, actually, we can give the farmers something they want or they think they want, which is this UHF technology. And then we'll look like the good guys, obviously, because they're obviously not particularly popular in Scotland at the moment either. So, yeah, it's still confusion. And the other thing is it's not ISO approved. It's not an ISO-approved technology, so international standards way of identifying a bovine animal, whereas the LF system is. You could argue, with the greatest respect, and I get devolution is great for lots of things, but there are certain functions in life that I struggle to understand why we need to muck about with devolution, and cattle identification is one of them, because actually you could have one office, as used to be the case, that does it all for the whole of the UK. The idea that you've got to have a separate office for Scotland and a separate office for Wales and a separate office for England and a separate office is bonkers. You know, the bonkers bit of it was when the Scots first had the EID, the Cattle Identification Office, their Scot EID thing opened, and the passports were like parchment. It was like, you know, some sort of proclamation every time you looked at an animal, because it's like a cardboard weight bit of paper. It's just ridiculous. So it would be simpler if there was one system across the board. UHF, LF, they've both got pros and cons. And actually, the report that was done by the English authorities and DEFRA onto the comparison between UHF and LF actually put LF in front. It was more reliable. Whilst it's a bit more expensive, it's more reliable, it's accredited, it's more robust. But this does nothing to help poor Scott with his market in Carlisle, with all these cattle coming either side of the border. It's just more work and more legwork and more cost when you could just have one system that fits all.
How much of this is down to national pride, though, and wanting to do things differently just because because you can?
Well, yeah, exactly. Look, some of that could be, and I respect that. And if that's what they want to do, that's fine. But I don't think they're going to be any further ahead. And there's also this notion that, UHF tag, it's like a credit card chip. You can store loads of information in it. Someone said that to me. It's really good. And I said, well, hang on a minute. Why would you have all the data sat in the cow's ear? All you need in the cow's ear is a chip with a 13 or whatever digit code, which correlates to a record on a cloud somewhere. You know, so there's a lot of misinformation here, and there's a lot of, you still get misreads with LF, you still get misreads with UHF. UHF is slightly pingier, but the reality is that cows will still wander around the side of an LF reader panel on a crush and get picked up. UHF is even more spready. It'll proliferate further, and so it'll pick up things that you don't want it to pick up. So the idea that I sell you 60 cattle on a lorry, Johann, and we point the zap gun at the whole lorry and it pings 60 tags, and then once you've bought all the cattle, you find you've got a bonus one because one didn't pick up, and it's just confusion. You're still going to count them all individually. So it could be national pride, but actually it just needs to be a bit of common sense. The first thing we need to do is just get the basic database, the new updated database is working before we get too carried away with the whole, and we know that LF works. We'll go with the English rollout of the EID January 27. Where the Scottish colleagues come, I don't know. That's going to be more confusing as well, because if we're having calves tagged in England and Wales, or certainly calves in England as of January 27 with EID WYSIWYG tags and not in the other principalities, there's yet more confusion. So actually, yeah, it's nonsense.
And there you have it, another challenge for the wonderful world that is UK agriculture. That is it for this week's episode of the Farmers Weekly podcast. We do hope you've enjoyed what you've heard. If you have, please do subscribe to us wherever you get your podcasts. And if you've really enjoyed what you've heard, please do, as always, leave us a 5-star review. We'll be back next week with all the latest news, views and analysis of all the big stories in UK agriculture. But for now, until next week, I'm Johann Tasker.
And I'm Hugh Broom.
Thank you for listening. This episode of the Farmers Weekly podcast was brought to you in association with KWS.